She attended her sister's wedding to the Duke, but when the veil was lifted, he spoke another name. The morning mist clung to the stone spires of Thornhall Chapel like spectral fingers, reluctant to release their grip upon the mortal world. Mariel Davenant paused at the threshold, her azure gown, woefully inadequate for a ducal ceremony, whispering about her ankles as she gathered her courage. The carriage bearing her sister had arrived moments before, trailing white ribbons and the expectations of two noble houses. Mariel clutched the small prayer book to her breast, its worn leather cover a shield against the opulence awaiting her within. "Miss Davenant, you honor us with your attendance," intoned the ancient butler, his voice carrying the practiced indifference of one who had witnessed generations of aristocratic pageantry. "Lady Seraphine has requested your presence in the antechamber before the ceremony commences." The words struck Mariel like tiny arrows. Of course Seraphine would summon her, to adjust a veil, to offer reassurance, to perform some final act of sisterly subjugation. She followed the butler's stooped figure down a corridor lined with ancestors, whose painted eyes seemed to follow her progress with aristocratic disdain. "How fortunate you are to witness your sister's elevation," remarked Lady Westmoreland as Mariel passed, the words honeyed with malice. "Few women of modest means are granted such proximity to greatness." Mariel inclined her head, swallowing the bitter draught of humiliation. "Indeed, my lady, fortune smiles upon me in the most unexpected ways." The antechamber glittered with morning light filtered through stained glass, casting pools of sapphire and ruby across the marble floor. Seraphine stood before a gilded mirror, a vision in ivory silk and Brussels lace. The wedding gown had cost more than their father's annual income, yet Seraphine wore it as though born to such splendor. "Ah, Mariel, at last." Seraphine turned, her golden curls arranged in perfect ringlets beneath a coronet of orange blossoms. "I require your assistance with the veil. It must fall just so." Mariel's fingers trembled as she lifted the gossamer creation, yards of handmade lace that had once adorned a French princess. The weight of it belied its delicate appearance, much like the burden of expectations that had always rested upon Seraphine's shoulders. "You seem pale, sister," Seraphine observed, studying Mariel's reflection with critical eyes. "I do hope you will not faint during the ceremony. The Duke of Winthorne is most particular about decorum." "I shall endeavor to remain conscious for your triumph," Mariel replied, pinning the veil in place with silver combs, "though I confess the early hour and lack of sustenance have rendered me somewhat light-headed." Seraphine laughed, the sound like crystal chimes in the silent room. "Always so dramatic, little Marie. Perhaps that is why father sent you to that dreadful school while I remained at home to learn the arts of society." She patted Mariel's cheek with gloved fingers. "But you shall have your reward for years of devotion. When I am Duchess, I shall find you a suitable match. Perhaps that widowed vicar from Hampstead. You always did favor books over ballrooms." The words, intended as kindness, cut deeper than any deliberate cruelty. Mariel stepped back, her task complete, her sister transformed into a bride worthy of a dukedom. "You are beautiful, Sarah. The Duke will be enchanted." A shadow crossed Seraphine's perfect features. "Beauty is a currency, not a blessing. The Duke does not seek enchantment but alliance. Our houses unite today, not our hearts." The chapel bells began their solemn peal, and a flurry of attendants entered to escort the bride to her destiny. Mariel was forgotten in the commotion, relegated to the periphery as she had been throughout their childhood. She slipped into the chapel and found her place among distant cousins and minor gentry. The ceremony proceeded with stately grace. Mariel watched through a veil of unshed tears as Duke Alaric Hawthorne awaited his bride at the altar, resplendent in his dark frock coat, adorned with the silver crest of Winthorne. He stood as rigid as the marble columns flanking the altar, his expression one of noble resignation rather than joyful anticipation. When Seraphine glided down the aisle on their uncle's arm, a collective sigh rose from the assembled guests. She was perfection embodied, the culmination of centuries of breeding and social engineering. Mariel closed her eyes briefly, unable to bear the sight of all she had been denied by fate's capricious hand. The Archbishop's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling, speaking of love and devotion with practiced solemnity. Mariel wondered if anyone else noted the irony, a loveless union blessed in the name of divine love. When the moment came for the lifting of the veil, she found herself holding her breath, as though awaiting the revelation of some great mystery. The Duke's gloved hands rose to the delicate lace, lifting it with ceremonial slowness to reveal his bride's face. The silence in the chapel was absolute. 100 souls suspended in anticipation. Then came the word, soft yet devastating in its clarity. Marielle. The name hung in the air, a single note discordant in the symphony of ceremony. Marielle's heart ceased its rhythm. Time stuttered to a halt. Surely she had imagined it, a product of her fevered mind and empty stomach. But the collective gasp that followed confirmed the unthinkable reality. The Duke of Winthorne, pillar of society and embodiment of noble virtue, had spoken the wrong name at the precise moment when tradition demanded absolute adherence to the script. Seraphine stood frozen, her perfect composure fracturing like ice in spring thaw. The Archbishop's mouth worked silently, seeking words to bridge the unbridgeable chasm that had opened before him, and Marielle, forgotten Marielle, felt the floor dissolve beneath her feet as every eye in the chapel turned to seek her face among the crowd. The seconds stretched like taffy pulled beyond its tensile strength, sweet yet near breaking. Marielle could not recall rising from her seat, nor traversing the polished stone floor, yet somehow she found herself standing before the altar, beneath the reproachful gaze of saints immortalized in stained glass. Her heart thundered against her ribs with such violence she feared it might shatter bone. "I beg your pardon," the Duke of Winthorne said at last, his voice a masterpiece of control, despite the pallor that had claimed his face. "A momentary distraction. Let us proceed." But the damage was irreparable. Seraphine's lips had compressed into a bloodless line, her eyes two chips of blue ice. The whispers began, a susurration like wind through autumn leaves, growing in volume until the Archbishop was forced to raise his hand for silence. "Perhaps," he suggested with clerical diplomacy, "we might adjourn briefly to the vestry to collect ourselves." "There shall be no adjournment," Seraphine declared, her voice ringing clear as a silver bell. "But there shall be truth at last." She turned to face the congregation, magnificent in her wounded dignity. "My sister and I have shared much through the years, a nursery, a governess, even a mourning period for our dear departed mother. It appears we have also shared the affections of my betrothed." Marielle shook her head, mute with horror. "Sirrah, no!" "Silence!" The word cracked like a whip. "You have already spoken through his lips. I require no further utterances from you." The Duke stepped forward, his composure fracturing at last. "Lady Seraphine, I implore you—" "You shall implore nothing from me, your grace," Seraphine interrupted, stripping off her gloves with deliberate slowness. "Our contract is void. My father shall call upon your solicitor regarding the return of my dowry." With that she dropped the gloves at his feet, a declaration of war more effective than any spoken challenge. Then, with regal bearing, she proceeded down the aisle alone, the train of her gown sweeping behind her like the tail of a comet. The assembled nobility parted before her, no one daring to impede her progress. When the great doors closed behind her, the silence that followed was absolute. "The ceremony is concluded," announced the Archbishop, closing his prayer book with finality. "May God grant us wisdom in these trying circumstances." The exodus that followed was barely controlled chaos, a river of silk and wool flowing toward the exits, carrying with it exclamations of shock and the first delicious morsels of scandal. Marielle remained rooted beside the altar, unable to command her limbs to motion. "Miss Davenant," the Duke's voice reached her as though across a great distance. "I must speak with you privately." Before she could respond, Lord Davenant materialized beside her, his face contorted with fury. "Oh, you shall do no such thing, sir. My daughter leaves with me this instant, before your callous blunder further besmirches her reputation." "Father, please," Marielle began, but was silenced by the pressure of his fingers upon her arm. "Not another word, girl. The damage you have wrought is incalculable." He began to propel her toward a side exit, his grip painful in its intensity. The Duke moved to intercept them, his height and bearing instantly commanding. "Lord Davenant, I assure you Miss Marielle bears no culpability in this unfortunate circumstance." "Unfortunate?" Lord Davenant's laugh held no mirth. "You have destroyed my eldest daughter's prospects and compromised my youngest's virtue with a single syllable. Your assurances are worth less than the air expended to deliver them." "Then perhaps gold will speak where words cannot," the Duke replied, his tone hardening. "I shall double the settlement offered to Lady Seraphine as compensation for today's irregularity." Lord Davenant's grip on Marielle's arm eased fractionally. "A generous gesture, Your Grace, though hardly sufficient to repair the damage to my family's standing. The settlement would, of course, be independent of any future arrangements that might be negotiated regarding Miss Marielle's hand." The implication hung in the air, impossible to misinterpret. Mariel felt her breath catch in her throat. Surely he could not mean, "You dishonor us with such a suggestion," Lord Davenant said coldly. "We are not pawns to be exchanged at your convenience." "On the contrary," the Duke replied, his amber eyes fixing upon Mariel's face with unnerving intensity. "I recognize the value of what was previously overlooked." "Mariel returns to Thornfield tonight," her father declared. "Should you wish to make amends, your solicitor may call upon mine at a more appropriate time." With that pronouncement, Lord Davenant guided Mariel through the vestry and into the waiting carriage. As the horses pulled away from the chapel, Mariel glanced back to see the Duke standing motionless upon the steps, his tall figure silhouetted against the Gothic archway. "He will call," her father stated with grim certainty, "and when he does, you will refuse him." Mariel turned to him in surprise. "Refuse? But you thought I would sell you to salvage this catastrophe." His voice softened marginally. "Whatever your sister believes, I am not entirely without sentiment. The Duke has revealed himself to be a man of questionable character. I will not condemn you to a lifetime with one who cannot honor his most solemn vows." The carriage jolted over uneven cobblestones, the motion echoing the turbulence in Mariel's heart. Through the window, she watched London recede, its spires and chimneys disappearing into the gathering mist. Ahead lay Thornfield and seclusion, her sanctuary and prison both. "What will become of Seraphine?" she whispered. Lord Davenant sighed, the sound weighted with paternal concern. "She departs for Italy tomorrow. Lady Constance has graciously offered to accompany her. Distance and time may yet repair what was broken today, but some fractures, once created, can never be perfectly mended." As Thornfield's gates loomed through the mist, Mariel touched the small medallion hidden beneath her bodice, her grandmother's final gift, and wondered if the same might be said of hearts. The carriage halted before the ancient oak door, and the family butler emerged to assist them. As Mariel's foot touched the gravel drive, a rider appeared at the gates, his cloak billowing behind him like dark wings. "It appears," Lord Davenant observed with resignation, "that the Duke of Winthorne is not a man who believes in allowing grass to grow beneath his feet." The Duke dismounted with fluid grace, his stallion's flanks heaving from the punishing pace he had set from London. The evening gloom had descended early, hastened by gathering storm clouds that mirrored the tempest in Mariel's breast. She stood motionless beneath the portico, unable to retreat, yet equally incapable of advance. "Lord Davenant," the Duke called, removing his riding gloves with deliberate care, "I must insist upon an audience with your daughter." "You mistake yourself, sir," her father replied, stepping forward to shield Mariel from view. "This is not your ducal estate where commands are issued and obeyed without question. You stand upon my land, where my word alone holds dominion." The Duke ascended the steps with measured tread, his features composed into a mask of aristocratic determination. "I have ridden 20 miles through approaching storm to speak words that must be said. Will you deny me this small courtesy after the grievous injury I have caused your house?" Lightning fractured the eastern sky, illuminating the three figures frozen in their tableau of confrontation. In that instant, Mariel saw something in the Duke's face that she had never observed during the months of his courtship of Seraphine: vulnerability, naked and unashamed. "Father," she said softly, placing a restraining hand upon his arm, "perhaps we might grant His Grace a brief audience. The storm approaches, and Christian charity demands we offer shelter at minimum." Lord Davenant's jaw clenched visibly, but years of ingrained social protocol prevailed over paternal instinct. "Very well. 10 minutes in the blue drawing-room, with the door remaining open. Mrs. Winters shall serve as chaperone." "I require no witness save your honourable self, my lord," the Duke replied, inclining his head in acknowledgement of the concession. They processed in silence through the oak-panelled entrance hall, the ancient floorboards creaking beneath their tread like arthritic joints, protesting sudden movement. The blue drawing-room, seldom used since Lady Davenant's passing, retained a melancholy air, despite the footman's hasty efforts to light candles and stir the banked fire to life. Lord Davenant positioned himself beside the mantelpiece, one hand resting upon the marble shelf in a posture that suggested he might as easily reach for the ornamental sword displayed above it. "Proceed, Your Grace. My daughter and I are all attention." The Duke removed his riding coat, revealing the formal attire he had worn for the aborted ceremony, now creased and travel-stained. "Miss Davenant," he began, addressing Mariel directly, "I come to offer the most profound apology for the distress my unconscionable lapse has caused you." Mariel seated herself upon the edge of a damask chair, her back straight as a chapel candle. "Your apology, while graciously tendered, would perhaps find more appropriate reception from my sister. Indeed, and I have dispatched a letter expressing my deepest contrition to Lady Seraphine," he acknowledged. "But it is to you I must explain an inexplicable act." Thunder rumbled in the distance, a bass counterpoint to the crackling fire. The Duke moved closer, his shadow elongating across the Aubusson carpet like spilled ink. "For 6 months I have paid court to your sister, as arranged by our families," he continued. "During that time our paths crossed but rarely, Miss Davenant, yet each encounter etched itself upon my memory with curious persistence." Mariel felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the room's dim illumination. "Your Grace flatters me unnecessarily. On the contrary, I speak only truth, a commodity that has been notably absent in recent proceedings." His voice lowered, resonant with unexpected emotion. "Your sister is a paragon of beauty and accomplishment, worthy of any man's admiration. Yet it was your quiet dignity, your unaffected intellect, that captured my attention like no diamond-bright beauty ever could." Lord Davenant stirred restively. "You dishonor yourself and my daughter with such declarations, sir. Honor has become a labyrinth from which I cannot extract myself through conventional means," the Duke replied without shifting his gaze from Mariel's face. "I entered a betrothal sanctioned by society, yet contradicted by my heart's truest inclination. Today, that contradiction found voice at the most damnable moment imaginable." Mariel rose suddenly, unable to remain seated beneath the intensity of his regard. "What would you have me say, Your Grace? That I absolve you of guilt? That I secretly harbored similar sentiments? My sister lies wounded by your inconstancy, and you stand in my father's home speaking words that can lead nowhere but to further ruin." "Not ruin," the Duke countered, stepping closer still. "Redemption. I have acted abominably toward Lady Seraphine, and for that I shall make every possible amends. But I would compound that error thousandfold if I now retreated into polite falsehood, rather than pursuing the truth that revealed itself today." "And what truth is that, sir?" Lord Davenant demanded, his patience visibly waning. The Duke withdrew a small velvet pouch from his waistcoat. "That my heart recognized what my conscious mind refused to acknowledge until the moment when pretense could no longer be sustained." He opened the pouch, extracting an object that caught the firelight and reflected it in fractured brilliance. Mariel gasped, recognizing the Winthorne signet ring, an heirloom passed through 20 generations of dukes. "This belongs rightfully to the woman who shall bear my name," the Duke stated simply. "I ask only that you permit me to call upon you properly, Miss Davenant, when sufficient time has elapsed to observe the proprieties." Lord Davenant stepped between them, his expression thunderous. "You have exceeded your allotted time and my limited forbearance, sir. My daughter is not some consolation prize to be claimed when your first choice becomes unavailable." "Father," Mariel began, but was silenced by his upraised hand. "Mariel is removed from society effective immediately," he declared. "She departs for her aunt's estate in Northumberland tomorrow." "I suggest you direct your matrimonial aspirations elsewhere, Your Grace." The Duke's face hardened, aristocratic hauteur reasserting itself. "You cannot isolate her indefinitely, my lord." "Perhaps not," Lord Davenant conceded, "but I can ensure that when she re-enters society it will be far from your sphere of influence." A tremendous thunderclap shook the window panes, nature's punctuation to the human drama unfolding within. The Duke replaced the ring in its pouch with deliberate care. "I shall respect your wishes for the present, Lord Davenant, out of regard for your daughter's reputation. But make no mistake, this matter is far from concluded." He bowed formally to Mariel, his eyes conveying what propriety forbade his lips to speak. Then, retrieving his coat, he strode from the room without awaiting dismissal. Lord Davenant moved to the window, watching as the Duke mounted his stallion and vanished into the storm-tossed night. "Pack only essentials," he instructed without turning. "The carriage leaves at first light." Alone in her bedchamber hours later, Mariel stood at the rain-lashed window, watching lightning illuminate the sodden landscape. Below, in the drive where the Duke had stood, a single glove lay forgotten upon the gravel. Whether dropped by accident or design, she could not determine. As thunder shook the ancient walls of Thornfield, she pressed her grandmother's medallion to her lips and whispered a prayer for clarity in the chaos that a single spoken name had wrought. In the east wing, a door opened and closed. The household held its breath, awaiting the dawn and whatever new tribulations it might bring. Northumberland greeted Mariel with relentless rain and leaden skies that mirrored the desolation of her spirit. Briarwood Manor, her aunt's ancestral home, loomed against the horizon like a reproach, all Gothic spires and weathered stone, its windows reflecting no light or welcome. The journey north had been conducted in near silence, Lord Davenant speaking only when necessary to relay instructions or request a change of horses. "Your aunt has been apprised of the circumstances," he informed her, as the carriage negotiated the rutted approach to the manor. "She has agreed to serve as your chaperone until the scandal subsides." "And how long might that be, Father?" Marielle inquired, her voice hoarse from disuse. Lord Davenant's face remained impassive. "Society's memory is capricious. A new scandal will eventually supplant yours in the common discourse. Until then you will remain here, devoting yourself to quiet pursuits and reflection upon the vicissitudes of propriety." Lady Augusta Winters received them in a parlour, redolent with the competing aromas of beeswax and decay. A widow of advancing years and diminishing fortune, she had retreated to Briarwood, following her husband's death, accompanied only by a skeletal staff and her memories of grander days. "How dreadfully romantic," she declared after Lord Davenant had outlined the chapel debacle with ruthless brevity. "A duke declaring his true feelings at the altar. It is like something from a sensation novel. I dare say Mrs. Radcliffe herself would find it excessive." "There is nothing romantic about public humiliation and broken contracts," Lord Davenant replied sharply. "Mariel requires sanctuary, not encouragement in her folly." Lady Augusta adjusted her spectacles, peering at her niece with undisguised curiosity. "She appears remarkably composed for one at the centre of such a tempest. Perhaps there is more winter's steel in her than we supposed." Lord Davenant's departure the following morning was conducted with minimal ceremony. He kissed Marielle's forehead, his lips cool against her skin, and extracted a promise of circumspection in her correspondence. "Nothing must reach London that could inflame the situation further," he cautioned. "Write only of weather and household matters to your sister or our acquaintances." Briarwood's isolation proved both balm and torment. The manor stood 2 miles from the nearest village, surrounded by windswept moors that offered solitude without solace. Lady Augusta, after her initial fascination with the scandal waned, largely left Marielle to her own devices. The days assumed a monotonous rhythm: breakfast in the morning room, walks when weather permitted, reading in the dust-moated library, and early retirement to a bedchamber where sleep remained elusive. One fortnight after her arrival, the Morning Post brought a thick packet addressed in Seraphine's unmistakable, elegant hand. Marielle broke the seal with trembling fingers, withdrawing several pages of closely written text. "Dearest sister," the letter began with unexpected warmth. "You must think me monstrous for maintaining silence these 14 days. I confess my heart has passed through many tempests since that ill-fated morning at Thornhall Chapel. Initial rage gave way to mortification, then to a curious emptiness that has only recently been replaced by something approaching clarity. The Duke has written thrice, each letter more eloquent than its predecessor in expressing contrition. I have burned them all unread, finding greater satisfaction in the flames consuming his words than I could in any explanation he might offer. Yet, in the ember's glow, I discovered an unexpected truth. I feel relief rather than bereavement. Our engagement was a masterpiece of familial strategy, lacking only the inconvenient element of genuine affection. I performed my role with precision, as I have been trained since childhood to become the perfect noble wife. Yet not once in 6 months did the Duke look at me as he looked at you in that single, devastating moment of truth. Italy beckons with promises of aesthetic distraction. Lady Constance has connections in Florence that may yet salvage my prospects. At 26, I am not yet consigned to perpetual spinsterhood, though I shall be more circumspect in my next matrimonial negotiation. As for you, little Marie, do not languish in northern exile on my account. Whatever transpired in the Duke's heart was not of your engineering. Father's punishment exceeds the crime, particularly as there was no crime, merely an unfortunate alignment of circumstances and suppressed sentiment. I release you from any obligation of sisterly guilt. Live, Marie. Choose your own path with the courage I never possessed. Your loving sister, Seraphine Marielle, pressed the letter to her heart, tears blurring her vision. Outside, the perpetual Northumberland rain had given way to watery sunshine, illuminating the moors with golden light. For the first time since her arrival, she felt the constriction around her heart ease fractionally. That evening, as she sat with Lady Augusta before a meagre fire, A commotion at the front door interrupted their desultory conversation about parish matters. The ancient butler appeared, his rheumy eyes wide with discomposure. "A gentleman caller, madam," he announced, his voice quavering with the enormity of the event. "The Earl of Renfield requests an audience with Miss Davenant." Lady Augusta straightened, instantly alert. "Renfield? At this hour, in Northumberland? This is most irregular." The Earl entered before the butler could retreat, his tall figure filling the doorway with commanding presence. Marielle rose instinctively, recognizing the Duke's cousin and closest confidant. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Augusta," he said, bowing with elegant precision. "Miss Davenant, I come as emissary in a matter of some delicacy." Lady Augusta gestured toward a chair with grudging hospitality. "You have travelled far, my lord. May I offer refreshment?" "I require nothing but a few moments of private conversation with Miss Davenant," the Earl replied, his gaze fixed upon Marielle's face with unsettling intensity. "That is impossible," Lady Augusta declared. "My niece is under my protection and propriety forbids—" "Propriety has become a labyrinth of contradictions," the Earl interrupted, echoing the Duke's words with uncanny precision. "Nevertheless, I shall respect your concerns. Might we compromise with the door remaining open, and you positioned within earshot but beyond the range of confidential discourse?" Lady Augusta hesitated, torn between convention and curiosity. "Very well," she conceded at length. "I shall sit by the window and admire the moonrise. But I warn you, sir, one improper syllable and I shall summon the footman." When she had positioned herself at a discreet distance, the Earl lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Miss Davenant, my cousin is half mad with anxiety for your welfare. Your father has forbidden all communication, returned his letters unopened, and threatened legal action should he attempt to approach Thornfield." Mariel clasped her hands to still their trembling. "Lord Davenant acts as he believes proper to protect both his daughters' reputations. A father's prerogative, certainly," the Earl acknowledged. "Yet does his protection not become imprisonment when it contravenes your own inclinations?" "My inclinations are irrelevant in this matter," Mariel replied, though her heart contracted painfully at the admission. "The Duke offered for my sister. Whatever confusion led to the events at the chapel cannot erase that fundamental truth." The Earl leaned closer, his expression grave. "The confusion was the moment when truth asserted itself against convenient falsehood. Alaric has broken his betrothal and made appropriate financial reparation to your sister. He stands free of all entanglements, save that invisible cord that has bound his heart to yours since your first meeting in Lady Carstairs' conservatory last autumn." Mariel's breath caught. "You speak of matters beyond your knowledge, sir." "On the contrary," the Earl countered with the hint of a smile. "I was present that evening when you spoke so passionately about Blake's poetry." Alaric mentioned afterward that he had never encountered a mind so attuned to both beauty and truth in one so young. It was the first time I had seen genuine animation in his eyes since his return from the peninsula. Lady Augusta stirred by the window, making a show of rearranging her shawl. The Earl drew a sealed letter from his coat and pressed it into Marielle's hand. "Read this when you are alone," he murmured. "Then follow the dictates of your heart, rather than the arbitrary constraints of a society that would sacrifice authentic feeling upon the altar of appearance." He rose, bowed formally, and addressed Lady Augusta in normal tones. "I thank you for your hospitality, madam. The moonlight should provide adequate illumination for my return journey." When he had departed, Lady Augusta returned to the fireside, her eyes bright with speculation. "Well, niece, what conspiracy did the Earl propose?" Marielle slipped the letter into her pocket, its presence burning against her skin like a coal. "No conspiracy, aunt. Merely a message of concern from an old acquaintance." That night, by the guttering light of a single candle, she broke the Duke's seal and unfolded the parchment with trembling fingers. As dawn's first light crept across the moor, she still sat motionless beside the window, the letter clasped to her breast, her future balanced upon the fulcrum of a single, impossible choice. The morning brought Lady Augusta to Marielle's door, her customary languid demeanor replaced by brisk purpose. "Your father arrives this afternoon," she announced without preamble. "A messenger preceded him with instructions that you are to prepare for immediate return to London." Marielle looked up from the half-packed valise that had occupied her since dawn. "Did the messenger indicate the reason for this sudden summons?" "Your father's communications are rarely expansive," Lady Augusta replied, examining the modest collection of belongings Marielle had arranged upon the bed. "However, the man mentioned something about reconciliation and contracts." I presume he has negotiated a resolution to your sister's unfortunate situation. A curious hollowness expanded in Marielle's chest. I see. Thank you for informing me, Aunt. Lady Augusta lingered, her sharp eyes noting the shadows beneath her niece's eyes, and the letter partially concealed beneath a folded nightgown. The Earl's visit has precipitated this development, I suspect. Your father's network of informants is admirably efficient. The Earl merely conveyed greetings from a mutual acquaintance, Marielle replied, the falsehood sitting uncomfortably upon her tongue. My dear child, Lady Augusta said with unexpected gentleness, dissembling requires practice to achieve proficiency. Your face betrays every emotion that crosses your heart. She moved closer, lowering her voice, though they were alone. I have lived 63 years in society's gilded cage. Wealth and position are poor substitutes for genuine affection, as my own marriage amply demonstrated. She reached out to touch Marielle's cheek with gnarled fingers. Whatever choice lies before you, consider its consequences for half a century hence, not merely the immediate horizon. Lord Davenant arrived as the watery northern sun began its early descent toward the moors. He entered Briarwood like a man accustomed to command, dispensing with customary pleasantries in favor of immediate action. The carriage is ready, he informed Mariel, barely acknowledging Lady Augusta's presence. We depart within the quarter hour. Might I inquire as to the urgency, Father? Mariel asked, summoning courage from some previously untapped reservoir. Aunt Augusta mentioned reconciliation. Lord Davenant's expression betrayed nothing. Your presence is required in London to finalize certain arrangements. The specifics need not concern you until we reach Thornfield. On the contrary, Marielle countered softly, if these arrangements pertain to my future, I believe I am entitled to at least cursory explanation before embarking on a journey of 300 miles. Her father's eyebrows rose fractionally, unaccustomed to such directness from his younger daughter. Very well. The Duke of Winthorne has made a formal offer for Seraphine's hand, with significant augmentation to the original settlement. Your sister, displaying unexpected pragmatism, has agreed to consider the proposal upon her return from Italy. Your presence is requested for the preliminary negotiations. The hollowness in Marielle's chest expanded until breathing became a conscious effort. I see. And Seraphine is amenable to this reconciliation? Your sister recognizes the practical advantages of the match, despite its inauspicious beginning, Lord Davenant replied. The scandal has largely subsided, and with proper management, the incident at the chapel can be reframed as a momentary indisposition on the Duke's part, perhaps attributable to the stuffy conditions and his recent military service. He consulted his pocket watch with pointed emphasis. Now, if your curiosity is satisfied, we must depart. The road to Newcastle is treacherous after nightfall. Lady Augusta stepped forward, her slight figure somehow imposing in its dignity. A moment more, if you please, Edward. I believe Marielle deserves complete transparency regarding these arrangements you propose. Lord Davenant's jaw tightened. This is a family matter, Augusta. Indeed it is, she agreed placidly. And as Marielle's aunt, I consider myself sufficiently familial to speak plainly. Have you informed her of Lord Penhurst's interest? Marielle glanced between them, confusion momentarily displacing despair. Lord Penhurst, the Marquess, a widower of excellent lineage and substantial fortune, Lady Augusta continued when Lord Davenant remained silent. Recently in need of a mother for his 3 young children, 47 years of age, I believe, and known for his collection of medieval weaponry rather than his conversational gifts. Understanding dawned with crushing weight. A double wedding, Marielle whispered. Seraphine to the Duke, and I to a man 3 times my age whom I have never met. Lord Penhurst expressed admiration for your deportment at the Millstone Assembly last season, her father stated, as though this constituted adequate foundation for matrimony. His offer is exceedingly generous, considering the cloud under which our family currently labors. How convenient for all concerned, Lady Augusta observed with acid sweetness. 2 problematic daughters disposed of advantageously in a single ceremony. London will speak of nothing else this season, the perfect narrative to supplant the previous unfortunate episode. Lord Davenant's complexion darkened dangerously. You overstep yourself, sister-in-law. On the contrary, Lady Augusta replied, I merely articulate what Marielle herself cannot. This arrangement benefits everyone except the young woman whose life you propose to barter. Marielle found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. And the Duke? He has agreed to this plan? His solicitor has presented preliminary terms, Lord Davenant acknowledged. The formal announcement, awaits only Seraphine's return and your consent to Lord Penhurst's proposal." "I see." Mariel turned toward the window, gazing out at the moors where mist had begun to gather in spectral tendrils. The Duke's letter burned in her pocket like an accusation, its passionate declarations of unwavering devotion now revealed as elaborate falsehood. "The carriage awaits," Lord Davenant reminded her with thinning patience. "I require a moment to gather my thoughts," Mariel replied, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "Perhaps you might inspect the horses while I bid Aunt Augusta farewell." When her father had departed with evident reluctance, Lady Augusta grasped Mariel's hands in her own. "Your eyes have changed, child. What resolution have you reached?" "The only one possible under the circumstances," Mariel answered. "I cannot return to London to participate in this charade." Lady Augusta nodded slowly. "The Earl's letter offered an alternative, I presume?" "Scotland," Mariel confirmed. "The Duke awaits at the coaching inn at Berwick-upon-Tweed. From there, we would proceed to Gretna Green." "Elopement," Lady Augusta murmured, testing the word as one might probe a tender tooth. "Society will be scandalized. Your father may never forgive such defiance. And yet the alternative is lifetime imprisonment in a marriage devoid of even basic compatibility," Mariel replied. "As you yourself advised, I must consider the consequences half a century hence." Lady Augusta moved to her writing desk and withdrew a small pouch that clinked softly. "My pin money from the quarter. It isn't much, but it may prove useful." She pressed it into Mariel's hand along with a sealed note. "This authorizes the bank at Newcastle to release a portion of my private funds to the bearer. Your Duke may have resources, but an independent woman must never be entirely dependent upon a man's provision." Mariel embraced her aunt fiercely. "How can I ever repay such kindness?" "Live authentically, child," Lady Augusta replied, returning the embrace before stepping back briskly. "Now, practical matters. There is a servant's stair at the end of the corridor. It leads to the kitchen garden, from which a path runs toward the village. The mail coach passes through at 4 o'clock bound for Berwick." She moved to the bell pull. "I shall summon Perkins to assist Lord Davenant with some imaginary difficulty regarding the carriage. The commotion should provide adequate distraction for your departure." Mariel hesitated at the door. "What will you tell him when he discovers my absence?" Lady Augusta's weathered face creased in a conspiratorial smile. "That you were overcome with maidenly apprehension regarding Lord Penhurst's advanced years and formidable reputation. By the time your father realizes the truth, you will be across the border and beyond his immediate reach." The escape unfolded with surprising ease. While Lord Davenant's attention was diverted by Lady Augusta's theatrical concerns about the carriage's suspension, Mariel slipped through the kitchen garden and across the rain-sodden moor. The village appeared through the mist like a watercolor painting, indistinct shapes gradually resolving into stone cottages and a single winding street. The mail coach arrived precisely at 4, its scarlet livery a shock of color against the grey landscape. As it rattled northward, bearing her toward an uncertain future, Mariel touched the Duke's letter in her pocket and wondered whether she pursued salvation or damnation in the arms of a man who had spoken her name at another woman's wedding. The border approached with every turning of the wheels, and with it, the irrevocable severance of all that had defined her existence. Ahead lay either paradise or purgatory, but the choice, for the first time, was entirely her own. Berwick-upon-Tweed materialized from the gathering dusk like a fortress against the night, its ancient walls and narrow streets testament to centuries of border conflict. The mail coach deposited Mariel at the Cross Keys Inn, a substantial establishment catering to travellers making the journey between Edinburgh and London. Rain had begun to fall again, a fine mist that purled upon her cloak and dampened the small valise containing her worldly possessions. The inn's common room buzzed with conversation and pipe smoke, a dozen disparate accents mingling in the warm air. Mariel hesitated at the threshold, acutely conscious of her solitary state. A respectable woman did not enter such establishments unaccompanied. A lady never would. Yet here she stood, neither fully respectable nor entirely lady, suspended between worlds by her own desperate choice. "Miss Davenant?" A middle-aged woman in sensible garments approached, her Scottish accent softened by evident education. "I am Mrs. Campbell, the innkeeper's wife. His Grace requested I watch for your arrival." Relief weakened Mariel's knees momentarily. "His Grace is here, then?" "Indeed, miss. He arrived yesterday and has been like a caged lion ever since, pacing the private parlour and watching the road." Mrs. Campbell's eyes reflected kindly assessment. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your chamber." You'll want to refresh yourself before meeting His Grace. The chamber, though modest, offered blessed privacy after the public scrutiny of the journey. A small fire crackled in the grate, and a pitcher of warm water awaited on the washstand. Marielle removed her sodden cloak and attempted to restore order to her travel-dishevelled appearance. His Grace requested your company in the private dining room when you are prepared, Mrs. Campbell informed her, hands efficiently smoothing the counterpane. Take what time you need, miss. The meal awaits your convenience. When the door closed behind the innkeeper's wife, Marielle sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of her actions suddenly overwhelming. She had fled her father's authority, abandoned her family's protection, and placed her future in the hands of a man whose constancy remained unproven. If the Duke's intentions proved dishonorable, or his affections ephemeral, she would find herself utterly ruined, without recourse or refuge in a world that forgave men's indiscretions but crucified women for the same. Her grandmother's medallion hung heavy against her breast, a talisman of independent women who had defied convention. Drawing strength from its familiar weight, Marielle smoothed her hair, straightened her spine, and descended to meet whatever fate awaited below. The private dining room lay at the rear of the inn, its diamond-paned windows overlooking a small garden now shrouded in darkness. A single figure stood silhouetted against the hearth, tall and motionless, his attention fixed upon the dancing flames. "Your Grace," Marielle said softly, her voice barely audible above the fire's gentle crackle. The Duke of Winthorne turned, his face transformed by an expression she had never witnessed during his courtship of Seraphine. Naked vulnerability mingled with desperate hope. "Miss Davenant," he responded, crossing the room in 3 strides to stand before her, close enough to touch yet maintaining a space of propriety between them. "You came." The simple statement contained volumes of uncertainty, as though even now, with her standing before him, he half expected her to vanish like a fever dream. Marielle studied his face, noting the shadows beneath his eyes and the new lines etched around his mouth. "I came," she confirmed, though I confess to considerable confusion regarding recent developments. The Duke's brow furrowed. "What developments do you reference?" "My father arrived at Briarwood this morning, intending to return me to London," she explained, watching his expression carefully. "He spoke of reconciliation with Seraphine, a renewed betrothal with enhanced settlement. He further mentioned arrangements regarding Lord Penhurst and myself." Comprehension dawned in the Duke's eyes, followed swiftly by something akin to horror. "Lord Davenant approaches negotiations with the tactical precision of a military campaign," he said at length. "However, in this instance, his intelligence is fatally flawed." "Then you have not offered for Seraphine again?" Marielle pressed, needing absolute clarity before proceeding further. "I would sooner offer for the Archbishop of Canterbury," the Duke replied with unexpected vehemence. "My solicitor met with Lord Davenant to finalize the compensatory settlement for the broken betrothal, a matter of honor and legal obligation. At no point was reconciliation discussed or contemplated." He guided her to a chair beside the fire, then seated himself opposite, leaning forward with urgent intensity. "Miss Davenant, Marielle, I have spent a fortnight in torturous self-examination, questioning how I allowed convention and expectation to nearly condemn us both to lifetimes of quiet misery. The moment at the altar was not a failure of honor, but its ultimate expression, truth asserting itself against the artifices of social engineering." Marielle's hands trembled in her lap. "And Lord Penhurst, what do you know of that arrangement?" The Duke's face darkened. "Penhurst is a dissolute gambler, whose first 2 wives died under questionable circumstances. That Lord Davenant would consider such a match for his daughter suggests either desperation or callous disregard for your welfare." Relief coursed through Marielle with dizzying force. "Then your letter, the proposal it contained, remains valid?" "Every word," he affirmed without hesitation. "I await only your consent to proceed to Gretna Green, where we may be married without the delays of banns or the interference of those who would separate us for their own purposes." The fire popped and hissed, sending momentary illumination across the modest room. Outside, rain pattered against the window panes, a gentle counterpoint to the thundering of Marielle's heart. "You understand what such a step would mean," she said carefully. "Society would condemn us both. Your family might disown you. Mine certainly shall disown me." "Society's condemnation is a small price for authentic happiness," the Duke replied. "As for family, my parents are long deceased, and the title is mine without entailment. My sister has written expressing full support for any match that brings genuine companionship rather than mere alliance." He reached across the space between them, his hand hovering inches from hers, offering but not presuming. "I ask you to become my wife, not for political advantage or financial gain, but because in your presence I glimpse a future illuminated by mutual understanding and respect. If your feelings do not align with mine, say so now, and I shall escort you directly to any destination you name, with your reputation intact." Marielle regarded their nearly touching hands. His broad and calloused from military service despite his aristocratic birth, hers pale and slender, marked by ink stains from her correspondence. Such different paths had led them to this moment of decision. "My feelings," she began hesitantly, "have been so long suppressed beneath duty and propriety that I scarcely recognize their voice. I admired you from our first meeting, finding in your conversation an unexpected depth that belied your public persona. When you began courting Seraphine, I buried that admiration beneath sisterly loyalty. The events at the chapel shattered all certainties, leaving only questions in their wake." She raised her eyes to his, finding there a patience she had not anticipated. "I cannot promise the polished sophistication Seraphine would have brought to the ducal mantle. My accomplishments are modest, my dowry negligible, my connections now severed by my flight. I seek a wife, not an ornament," the Duke responded quietly. "Your intellect, compassion, and moral courage are dowry enough for any man of sense." Marielle's fingers moved the final inches to rest upon his, a gesture more intimate than any embrace given her upbringing. "Then yes, Your Grace, I consent to becoming your wife, though the path before us seems fraught with complication." The Duke, Alaric, as she must now learn to call him, turned his hand to clasp hers properly. "The worthiest journeys often are." He raised her fingers to his lips, the gesture both courtly and surprisingly tender. "We depart for Gretna Green at first light. The Scottish marriage laws require only our mutual consent declared before witnesses, without the delays English law would impose." Mrs. Campbell entered bearing a tray laden with simple but substantial fare, her expression betraying no judgment at finding them with clasped hands. "Your dinner, Your Grace, Miss Davenant. I've taken the liberty of preparing the blue chamber for the young lady, with my daughter to serve as lady's maid until suitable arrangements can be made." When she had withdrawn, Marielle found herself suddenly ravenous, the day's emotional turmoil having burned away her customary delicate appetite. They dined with surprising companionability, discussing literature and philosophy rather than the momentous step they proposed to take on the morrow. As the meal concluded, a commotion arose from the inn's forecourt, horses' hooves on cobblestones, and voices raised in imperious command. Alaric rose, his posture instantly alert. "It seems," he observed with grim resignation, "that Lord Davenant has divined your destination with unfortunate accuracy." Mariel paled, her newly found courage faltering. "He will forcibly return me to London." "Not while I draw breath," Alaric replied, moving to the door with purposeful strides. "Remain here. I shall address your father directly." Alone in the suddenly silent dining room, Marielle listened to the muffled confrontation occurring in the inn's entrance hall. Her father's voice rose in righteous indignation, followed by Alaric's measured tones. The innkeeper's placating interjections suggested mounting tension. The door opened abruptly to admit Lord Davenant, his travelling clothes rain-spattered and his countenance thunderous. Behind him Alaric stood with the coiled tension of a man prepared for any eventuality. "So," Lord Davenant said without preamble, "you would disgrace our family name through elopement with a man who publicly humiliated your sister. I had thought better of your character, Marielle." She rose, drawing strength from the memory of Lady Augusta's parting advice. "And I had thought better of yours, father. Lord Penhurst, a man known for gambling and cruelty, old enough to be my grandfather?" Lord Davenant's gaze flickered momentarily. "Penhurst offered security and position, a generous proposal given the circumstances. Given that you sought to sell me to the highest bidder, regardless of character or compatibility," Marielle countered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I am of age, father. I may legally marry without your consent, though I would have preferred your blessing." "My blessing?" Lord Davenant laughed harshly. "For this clandestine arrangement, with a man who has already proven himself incapable of honoring a betrothal? You are more naive than I suspected." Alaric stepped forward, his bearing every inch the Duke, despite his travel-worn appearance. "Lord Davenant, I understand your concern for your daughter's welfare. Allow me to propose a compromise that might preserve both her happiness and your family's dignity." Lord Davenant's eyebrow arched skeptically. "I am listening, though I promise nothing." A proper wedding at Thornhall Chapel 1 month hence, Alaric suggested. Banns read in accordance with ecclesiastical law, settlements drawn to your satisfaction, society properly informed through formal announcement. And in the interim, Lord Davenant demanded, am I to trust Mariel's reputation to your dubious protection? In the interim, Miss Davenant may reside with my sister, the Countess of Harewood, as her companion, Alaric continued smoothly. Lady Harewood's reputation is beyond reproach, her household managed with impeccable propriety. The proposal hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across a chasm of wounded pride and threatened autonomy. Mariel held her breath, recognizing the elegant solution it presented, honor preserved without sacrifice of essential happiness. Lord Davenant turned to study his daughter's face, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman who had emerged from the dutiful child he had dispatched to Northumberland. You are determined in this course? I am, father, Mariel replied simply. My heart and mind stand in rare alignment on this matter. The silence stretched between them, weighted with years of unexpressed feeling and unacknowledged truth. Finally, Lord Davenant inclined his head fractionally. Very well. A proper wedding it shall be, with all attendant ceremony. The world shall never know how narrowly scandal was averted. He fixed Alaric with a steely gaze. But know this, your grace, if you bring my daughter one moment's unhappiness, neither your title nor your wealth shall shield you from a father's retribution. On that point, sir, we find ourselves in perfect agreement, Alaric replied gravely. As her father departed to secure accommodations for the night, Mariel released the breath she had been holding. The future had altered shape yet again, from desperate elopement to sanctioned union, but the essential truth remained unchanged. She had found her voice, and with it, the courage to shape her own destiny. The rain ceased its gentle assault upon the windows, and through a momentary break in the clouds, stars glimmered in the northern sky, distant, constant, and unexpectedly hopeful. The Countess of Harewood's London residence stood in elegant contrast to the austerity of Briarwood and the weathered grandeur of Thornfield. Situated on Berkeley Square, the townhouse boasted freshly painted shutters, immaculate stone steps, and window boxes spilling vibrant geraniums into the late spring sunshine. Lady Helena Hawthorne, 5 years Alaric's junior, and possessed of his same amber eyes, welcomed Mariel with unexpected warmth. At last, she declared, embracing Mariel with continental informality, a prospective sister who values conversation above conquest. I despaired of Alaric, ever exercising proper judgment in matrimonial matters. The 3 weeks that followed unfolded with dreamlike unreality. Lady Helena proved both formidable chaperone and staunch ally, introducing Mariel to her select circle while simultaneously shielding her from the more vicious elements of London society. Morning calls were carefully vetted, invitations scrutinized for potential unpleasantness. Yet beneath this protective canopy, Mariel blossomed like a hothouse flower suddenly granted proper light and air. You shall not cower from society, Lady Helena declared on Mariel's 3rd evening in residence. We shall face the curious and the cruel with perfect composure. Remember, you will shortly outrank nearly every woman who presumes to judge you. Together, they attended musical evenings, literary salons, and intimate dinner parties, where Mariel discovered her voice valued rather than merely tolerated. The transition from invisible second daughter to future duchess required constant navigation, yet each day brought increased confidence in her ability to inhabit this unexpected role. Alaric called daily, adhering scrupulously to the proprieties, while making his devotion evident in 100 small ways. Books selected to match her literary interests, posies of violets chosen for their modest beauty rather than showy extravagance, conversations that invited her mind to stretch beyond conventional feminine boundaries. You surround me with such thoughtfulness, Mariel observed during one such visit, Lady Helena maintaining discreet presence at the far end of the drawing-room. So yet I have nothing to offer in return save myself, hardly equal compensation. On the contrary, Alaric replied, his voice lowered for her ears alone, you offer the rarest commodity in our stratified society, authenticity. Do you know how many conversations I endured with your sister, where neither of us spoke a single honest word? Polite nothings exchanged like counterfeit currency, acknowledged as worthless, yet accepted by mutual agreement. Mariel glanced toward the window, where spring sunlight illuminated the square below. Seraphine was trained from the cradle to be ornamental rather than substantial. Our father saw little value in female education, beyond the accomplishments necessary to secure advantageous marriage. Yet you somehow developed independent thought despite these constraints, Alaric noted with evident admiration. How did you manage such alchemy? My grandmother's influence, Marielle explained, touching the medallion at her throat. She recognized something in me, a hunger perhaps, and fed it secretly with books and ideas my father would have considered dangerously progressive. The medallion caught the light, its simple silver design unremarkable save for the Latin inscription encircling the rim. Alaric leaned closer, examining the worn lettering with scholarly interest. Veritas in tenebris lucet, he read. Truth shines in darkness. Her personal motto, Marielle confirmed. Grandmother was considered scandalously independent in her day. She managed her own estates after grandfather's death, rather than remarrying or submitting to male guardianship. A hereditary trait, it seems, Alaric observed with a smile. Our children shall inherit formidable spirit. The casual mention of future offspring brought colour to Marielle's cheeks. Lady Helena, observing from her strategic position, cleared her throat with theatrical emphasis. I believe we should depart for Lady Thornfield's musical evening, she announced, rising with practiced grace. The hour grows late, and punctuality is the courtesy of princes, or in our case, duchesses in training. As the wedding date approached, London buzzed with competing narratives regarding the impending nuptials. Some whispered of scandalous elopement, thwarted by paternal intervention. Others suggested the Duke had always preferred the younger Davenant sister, but had been manipulated into offering for Seraphine through parental maneuvering. The most charitable interpretation cast the chapel incident as the Duke's temporary indisposition, corrected through proper medical attention, and now culminating in the match that should have occurred initially. Seraphine's return from Italy a week before the ceremony added final complexity to the unfolding drama. She arrived at Lady Helena's townhouse unannounced one afternoon, her continental attire and newly confident bearing transforming her from English rose to cosmopolitan woman of the world. Marie, she greeted, embracing her sister with genuine affection. How radiant you appear. Happiness becomes you exceedingly well. The sisters retired to the morning room, where sunlight created dappled patterns across the Aubusson carpet. Marielle studied her sister's face, searching for signs of lingering resentment or pain. I would not have proceeded without your blessing, she said softly. Your letter freed me to follow my heart, yet I have worried daily that your generosity exceeded your true feelings on the matter. Seraphine laughed, the sound lighter than Marielle remembered. My true feelings were primarily wounded pride and thwarted ambition, hardly noble emotions deserving of consideration. Italy provided perspective I sorely needed. She removed her gloves with deliberate care, revealing hands tanned by Mediterranean sun, a shocking departure from English alabaster ideals. In Florence, I met a professor of antiquities, an American gentleman of limited fortune, but unlimited intellectual passion. He spoke to me not as an ornament to be admired, but as a mind to be engaged. Seraphine, Marielle breathed, comprehension dawning. Have you formed an attachment? I have formed a revolution in thought, her sister replied enigmatically. The outcome remains undetermined, but the process has proved most illuminating. For the first time, I question whether a dukedom is adequate compensation for a lifetime of performative existence. She reached across to clasp Marielle's hands. You and Alaric, forgive me, I still think of him as the Duke, possess what I now recognize as the foundation of genuine contentment, mutual regard based on authentic knowledge of one another. Cherish that rare alignment. It outvalues any coronet or grand estate. The wedding day dawned with auspicious clarity, the English spring offering a rare gift of cloudless azure skies and gentle breezes. Thornhall Chapel, scene of earlier catastrophe, had been transformed through Lady Helena's exacting direction. White roses and trailing ivy softened Gothic severity. Sunlight streamed through ancient stained glass, casting jewel-toned patterns across stone floors, where generations of hawthorns had stood for christenings, marriages, and final benedictions. Marielle, dressed in her chambers at Thornfield, attended by both Seraphine and Lady Helena. Her wedding gown, crafted of ivory silk and antique Valenciennes lace, eschewed fashionable excesses in favor of elegant simplicity. No veil, she had specified, despite Lady Helena's initial protestations. I wish nothing between Alaric's eyes and mine when we speak our vows. In place of traditional floral coronet, she wore her grandmother's medallion on a new silver chain, something old carried into her future. Seraphine fastened it with steady fingers, then stepped back to assess the completed vision. Perfect, she pronounced. You look precisely as you are, neither disguised nor enhanced, but authentically Mariel. Lord Davenant's knock interrupted this feminine conclave. He entered with uncharacteristic hesitancy, his usual autocratic bearing tempered by an emotion Mariel could not immediately identify. "The carriage awaits," he announced, then paused, surveying his younger daughter with evident struggle. "You are most becoming, Mariel. Your mother would have been pleased." The unprecedented reference to her long-deceased parent rendered Mariel momentarily speechless. She had been an infant when Lady Davenant succumbed to childbed fever. No portrait remained, and her father had discouraged all mention of his wife throughout their childhood. "Thank you, father," she managed at last. "I have often wondered what she might have thought of my choices." "Elizabeth possessed remarkable clarity of vision," Lord Davenant replied, offering his arm with formal precision. "She would have recognized the wisdom in following one's heart, as I failed to do until recently." The admission, however oblique, represented such dramatic departure from Lord Davenant's lifelong philosophy that Mariel accepted it as the closest approximation of blessing he could muster. Together they descended the grand staircase, crossed the entrance hall where generations of Davenants had welcomed and bid farewell to the world, and entered the waiting carriage. Thornhall Chapel bell tolled once as they approached, its sonorous note hanging in the spring air like a benediction. Mariel took a deep breath, steadying herself for the moment when she would walk toward Alaric, not as replacement or consolation, but as his deliberate, desired choice. The chapel doors opened at her approach. Within, Alaric waited before the same altar, where weeks earlier he had spoken her name and altered both their destinies. This time, as she moved toward him on her father's arm, his smile held no trace of hesitation or doubt, only absolute certainty in the rightness of their union. When Lord Davenant placed her hand in Alaric's, the transfer representing millennia of patriarchal tradition, Mariel felt something unexpected pass between them, not merely the relinquishment of authority, but a silent acknowledgement of her right to determine her own happiness. The ceremony proceeded with stately grace, the Archbishop's voice rising to the vaulted ceiling in familiar cadence. When the moment came for Alaric to speak the name of his bride, the chapel fell silent, the collective memory of his previous error lending dramatic tension to the exchange. "I, Alaric James Hawthorne," he declared, his voice carrying to the furthest corner of the ancient space, "take thee, Mariel Elizabeth Davenant, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Her name, spoken with such unwavering certainty, echoed like a vow fulfilled rather than broken. As the Archbishop pronounced them man and wife, Mariel felt the weight of scandal and uncertainty dissolve into the spring sunshine streaming through centuries-old glass. The Duke of Winthorne had spoken her name twice in Thornhall Chapel, once in error that revealed truth, and once in truth that corrected error. Between those two utterances lay the journey that had transformed her from forgotten shadow to woman fully seen and chosen. Summer unfurled across England like an emerald banner, bringing with it the rhythms and rituals of aristocratic life. Mariel's transition from Miss Davenant to Her Grace the Duchess of Winthorne proceeded with occasional awkwardness, but surprising rapidity. Winthorne Abbey, the Duke's principal seat in Hampshire, welcomed its new mistress with centuries of tradition, tempered by Alaric's determination to establish their union as partnership rather than mere dynastic arrangement. "These rooms have been the Duchess's domain since Tudor times," he explained, escorting her through a sequence of elegant chambers in the Abbey's east wing. "However, they were last occupied by my mother, who found them excessively formal. You should feel entirely at liberty to reconfigure any aspect that doesn't suit your preferences." Mariel trailed her fingers along damask wall coverings and mahogany wainscoting, absorbing the weight of history embedded in every architectural detail. "It's rather like inheriting a small kingdom," she observed, complete with established customs and expectant subjects. "A diplomatic challenge worthy of your intelligence," Alaric acknowledged. "The household staff has served Winthorne for generations. Some families can trace their service to the original land grant under Henry VII. They will respect your position, but true acceptance must be earned through demonstrated respect for the Abbey's traditions." The learning curve proved steep, but not insurmountable. Mrs. Pettigrew, the formidable housekeeper who had managed the domestic operations for 3 decades, initially regarded Mariel with barely concealed skepticism. The new Duchess's youth and inexperience with large households presented legitimate concerns about her capacity to oversee 50 indoor servants and the complex machinery of aristocratic hospitality. "We typically serve 8 courses at formal dinners, Your Grace," Mrs. Pettigrew explained during their first consultation regarding household matters. The late Duchess favoured French service exclusively, with full silver changes between each course. That seems unnecessarily burdensome for both staff and guests, Marielle replied thoughtfully. Perhaps we might consider Russian service for informal gatherings. My aunt found it more conducive to natural conversation, as it eliminates the constant disruption of tableside carving and serving. Mrs. Pettigrew's eyebrows rose fractionally. Whether in surprise at Marielle's knowledge or dismay at suggested innovation remained unclear. As your grace wishes, though the second footman will require additional training in proper platter presentation. Then we shall provide that training, Marielle decided, and I should like to review the household accounts myself rather than relying solely on the steward's quarterly summary. This direct approach, neither imperious nor diffident, gradually earned, if not Mrs. Pettigrew's affection, then at least her grudging respect. By midsummer, the domestic operations had achieved equilibrium, with traditions honoured but not ossified, and innovations introduced with diplomatic sensitivity to established order. The external duties of a duchess proved more challenging to navigate. Marielle's first formal dinner as hostess coincided with the quarterly meeting of Hampshire magistrates, placing her at the centre of county politics and local governance. You needn't concern yourself with the substantive discussions, Lady Helena advised during a preparatory visit. Simply ensure the meal proceeds smoothly and divert the conversation toward neutral topics should political disagreements grow heated. Marielle arranged seating with strategic consideration, separating known antagonists while balancing political factions throughout the long table. The evening unfolded without incident until Lord Montague, a conservative magistrate of advancing years and diminishing filters, addressed her directly during the fish course. I understand your sister has taken up residence in Florence, Duchess. Most irregular for an unmarried gentlewoman to establish independent household abroad. One hopes she maintains proper chaperonage to avoid continental entanglements. The challenge, thinly veiled beneath social pleasantry, created momentary silence among nearby diners. Marielle set down her fork with deliberate calm. My sister studies Renaissance art under Professoressa Donati's guidance at the Uffizi, she replied evenly. The Professoressa's scholarly reputation is beyond reproach, as is her supervision of female students. Seraphine's letters suggest she finds particular resonance in Artemisia Gentileschi's work, a female artist who overcame considerable societal constraints to achieve recognition in a male-dominated field. Lord Montague harumphed, clearly unprepared for substantive response rather than embarrassed deflection. Unusual interest for a young lady of breeding. In my day, women concerned themselves with household management rather than foreign painters. Fortunately, Marielle observed with a smile that belied the steel beneath, our understanding of female capability expands with each generation. I find managing Winthorne's 15,000 acres and supervising 50 servants leaves ample intellectual capacity for additional interests. Perhaps you would enjoy seeing the improvements to the East Tenant farms. The Duke and I implemented drainage innovations that increased yield by 17% this season. From the head of the table, Alaric watched this exchange with poorly concealed admiration. When Lord Montague retreated into his wine-glass, effectively neutralized, the Duke caught Marielle's eye and raised his glass in silent toast to her diplomatic victory. Such moments of public partnership increased as summer progressed. When agricultural depression threatened tenant farmers across Hampshire, the Duke and Duchess jointly developed a program reducing rents in exchange for implementation of scientific farming methods. Alaric provided capital. Marielle designed the educational component, teaching farmers' wives to maintain account books that tracked expenditure against yield. You've transformed these people's understanding of their own capacity, Alaric observed during an evening ride across estate lands. They had paused their horses atop a gentle rise, overlooking newly drained fields where wheat grew in orderly abundance. Jenkins told me yesterday that his wife now manages their household economy better than he ever did, freeing him to focus on crop rotation and soil management. Marielle smiled, adjusting her riding habit as a breeze rippled across the hillside. Women have always possessed such abilities. They simply lacked opportunity and encouragement to develop them. Your grandmother understood this principle, according to the estate journals I found in the library. Ah, you've discovered the notorious journals, Alaric laughed. The fourth Duchess nearly incited agricultural revolution with her radical notions regarding female education among tenant families. Hardly radical to suggest that literate wives might contribute to farm productivity, Marielle countered. Though I admit her proposal for a tenant daughter's school was impressively forward-thinking for 1789. They rode in companionable silence along the ridge, the setting sun casting long shadows across land that had belonged to hawthorns since before Tudor roses bloomed. Below, the abbey's Gothic spires pierced the twilight, windows gradually illuminating as servants lit evening lamps. "Are you content, Marielle?" Alaric asked suddenly, drawing his horse alongside hers. "These months have required considerable adaptation on your part. New position, responsibilities, an entire household accustomed to different management. I sometimes fear I've thrust you into waters too deep for comfortable navigation." She turned to study his face, finding their genuine concern rather than perfunctory inquiry. "I am more than content," she assured him. "I am fulfilled in ways I never imagined possible. Each day brings challenges, certainly, but also the profound satisfaction of meeting them beside someone who values my mind as well as my presence." The admission, offered without calculation or artifice, seemed to touch something elemental within him. He reached across the space between their horses to clasp her hand. "When I spoke your name in the chapel that day," he said softly, "it was not conscious choice, but truth asserting itself against pretense. Every day since has confirmed the rightness of that momentary honesty." As summer yielded to early autumn, bringing with it the first bronze touches to Hampshire's woodlands, Marielle received an unexpected letter bearing Italian postmark. Seraphine's distinctive hand covered several pages with uncharacteristic urgency. "Dearest Murray, I write in haste and with considerable trepidation, knowing that what I propose defies every principle of conventional propriety. Professor Harrington has asked for my hand in marriage. His position at the Uffizi is secure but modest, his family in Boston respectable but hardly aristocratic by English standards. Father will object strenuously to such a match, citing diminished prospects and American connections as insurmountable barriers, yet I find myself unable to contemplate refusing him. These months in Florence have awakened understanding of my own capacity for intellectual and emotional engagement beyond the ornamental existence for which I was trained. James values precisely those aspects of my character that English society deemed superfluous or undesirable in a potential duchess. I write not seeking permission, but requesting alliance. Might you and Alaric receive us at Winthorne following a quiet wedding here in Florence? Your approval would provide bridgehead for eventual reconciliation with father, whose disappointment I anticipate but cannot allow to determine my future happiness. Your sister in both blood and newfound courage, Seraphine Marielle, sought Alaric in his study, where estate maps covered the massive oak desk that had served 17 dukes before him. He looked up at her entrance, his expression warming instantly. "You appear both troubled and determined," he observed, setting aside his quill. "A formidable combination in my experience." Wordlessly, she extended Seraphine's letter. He read it carefully, his face betraying nothing until he reached the final paragraph. "She shows admirable strategic thinking," he commented, returning the pages. "Our support would indeed provide considerable social insulation against potential ostracism." "Then you would welcome them?" Marielle asked, relief evident in her voice. "I would welcome your sister's happiness as extension of your own," Alaric replied simply. "And I find something rather poetic in the symmetry. Two sisters, who each defied convention to marry according to genuine preference rather than calculation." He rose, moving around the desk to stand before her. "Draft your reply immediately. Assure Seraphine that Winthorne stands ready to receive them whenever they choose to return to England." As Marielle turned to depart, he added softly, "Tell her also that happiness requires certain courage, but that once found, it proves worth every sacrifice required in its attainment." The autumn equinox arrived with golden splendor, painting Winthorne's ancient oaks and beeches in amber and crimson. On the morning that marked 6 months since their wedding, Alaric presented Marielle with a small mahogany box bearing the ducal crest. "A tradition among Hawthorne marriages deemed successful at the half-year mark," he explained, as she lifted the hinged lid. Within lay a signet ring sized for feminine hand, bearing the Winthorne arms with one significant modification. Encircling the shield and supporters ran a Latin inscription, Veritas in tenebris lucet. "Truth shines in darkness," Marielle whispered, recognizing her grandmother's motto now incorporated into centuries of heraldic tradition. "I had thought to surprise you," Alaric said, taking the ring and sliding it onto her right hand. "But perhaps you anticipated this moment?" Marielle smiled, a private joy illuminating her features. Not this specific gift, but perhaps something equally momentous to mark the occasion. She guided his hand to rest against her still flat abdomen. The Winthorne nursery will require reopening by spring's arrival. His face transformed, wonder replacing aristocratic reserve. In that unguarded moment, Marielle glimpsed the full measure of the man she had married, not merely duke and landowner, but partner in the truest sense, capable of vulnerability as profound as his strength. "How long have you known?" he asked, voice hushed with reverence. "With certainty, only days, but I've suspected since late August." She covered his hand with her own, their fingers entwining over the future they had created. "Our child will be born into truth rather than obligation, conceived in love rather than duty." Outside Winthorne's mullioned windows, autumn light gilded ancient stonework that had witnessed centuries of aristocratic unions made for advantage, alliance, and property. Yet within this particular chamber, something rarer had taken root. A marriage that had begun with a name spoken out of turn, yet had grown into partnership founded on mutual respect and genuine affection. The Duke of Winthorne drew his Duchess close, her head resting against his heart, their hands joined in protection of new life. No veil separated them now, no pretense obscured the simple truth that had asserted itself that spring day in Thornhall Chapel, that love, once recognized, cannot be commanded into silence, even by the most rigid dictates of society. The spring of 1875 arrived at Winthorne with characteristic English temperance, neither with Mediterranean flourish nor Nordic austerity, but in graduated shifts of green across ancient parkland and tentative blossoms in sheltered gardens. Lady Catherine Elizabeth Hawthorne, aged 5 and possessed of her mother's grey eyes and her father's determined chin, pressed her face against the nursery window as the carriage appeared on the distant drive. "They're here, Mamma," she called, excitement rendering her incapable of the composure repeatedly emphasized by her governess. "Aunt Seraphine and Uncle James have arrived at last?" Marielle smiled, moving to join her daughter at the window. The years had brought subtle changes to her appearance, a new assurance in her bearing, a serenity that came from purpose rather than resignation. The Duchess of Winthorne had grown into her role with grace that belied her once uncertain beginnings. "So they have, dearest, and with perfect timing, as your aunt promised in her letter." She smoothed Catherine's unruly curls, a gesture more affectionate than corrective. "Remember that your cousins may be weary from their journey. Florence to Hampshire requires considerable fortitude, even for adventurous children." "Oliver wrote that Italian trains travel faster than English ones," Catherine informed her, with the authority of ongoing correspondence with her 8-year-old cousin, "and that the passage from Calais was dreadfully rough, but he didn't suffer from seasickness like his sisters." Alaric entered the nursery, his tall figure silhouetted against the corridor's light. The intervening years had added distinguished silver at his temples, but diminished nothing of his vigor or presence. "I see our advanced scouts have already spotted the approaching party," he observed with a smile. "Catherine, would you like to accompany me to the entrance hall to greet your cousins? Your mother should perhaps remain here, given her condition." Catherine bounded from the window seat, always eager for her father's company. "May we show Oliver the new foal? I promised in my last letter that he could name it." A diplomatic gesture worthy of a future duchess, Alaric commended her, offering his hand. "Though perhaps we might suggest parameters to avoid christening the poor creature with one of those classical appellations your cousin favors. The stable master would never recover from addressing a horse as Sophocles or Euripides." When they had departed in a flurry of childish questions and paternal responses, Marielle returned to the window, one hand resting gently upon the curve of her abdomen, where the next Hawthorne air grew steadily beneath her heart. At 32, she approached this third pregnancy with calm anticipation, rather than the anxious uncertainty that had accompanied Catherine's birth. The carriage had reached the main entrance, its matching greys slowing to a dignified halt before Winthorne's ancient portico. Even from this distance, Marielle recognized her sister's elegant figure emerging first, followed by Professor James Harrington, whose American informality remained charmingly incongruous amidst English aristocratic surroundings. Their 3 children tumbled after them, Oliver the scholar already at 8, Emma, whose artistic talents showed promise of equaling her Italian namesake, and little Clara, born in Florence during the family's extended residency at the American Academy. The Harringtons' path had not been without complication. Lord Davenant had indeed opposed the match with characteristic vehemence, threatening disinheritance and social ostracism. Only Marielle's intervention, backed by Alaric's considerable influence, had prevented complete familial rupture. The compromise, negotiated over months of delicate correspondence, allowed Seraphine her chosen husband, while preserving nominal family connections through annual visits to England and regular correspondence. Professor Harrington's unexpected appointment to Harvard's newly established Department of Classical Archaeology had further complicated matters, removing Seraphine even farther from English society's watchful eye. Yet this geographical distance had ultimately proved beneficial, allowing the couple to establish their own domestic patterns free from constant comparison to aristocratic standards. Below, Catherine had emerged to greet her cousins, her formal curtsy dissolving immediately into childish exuberance as she embraced Oliver and his sisters. The adults observed this reunion with evident pleasure, Alaric extending formal welcome, while household staff began the elaborate choreography of unloading trunks and conveying luggage to guest chambers. Marielle smiled, recognizing in this tableau the fruition of seeds planted years earlier in Thornhall Chapel. That moment of apparent catastrophe, the wrong name spoken at precisely the wrong time, had initiated a cascade of consequences that ultimately granted both Davenant sisters lives of authentic connection rather than ornamental existence. A gentle knock at the nursery door preceded Lady Augusta's entrance. Now approaching her 70th year, Marielle's aunt had exchanged Briarwood's isolation for permanent residence at Winthorne, where her forthright opinions and unconventional perspectives provided welcome counterpoint to aristocratic convention. "I see the American contingent has arrived," she observed, joining Marielle at the window. "Excellent timing, as always." Seraphine develops increasingly precise habits with each passing year, a surprising evolution for one who once considered punctuality beneath her notice. Marielle laughed softly. "Marriage to an academic has imposed certain disciplines. James cannot abide tardiness in any form, a peculiarly American fixation with time's efficient use. A quality not entirely without merit," Lady Augusta conceded, adjusting her spectacles to better observe the scene below. "Though one hopes it doesn't completely overwhelm the artistic temperament Seraphine has so carefully cultivated. There must be balance in all things, efficiency and beauty, tradition and innovation." This philosophy had become something of a family motto over the years, informing the Winthorne approach to estate management, political involvement, and domestic arrangements. Under Marielle's guidance, the ancient ducal seat had maintained its grandeur while adapting to changing times, introducing modern agricultural methods while preserving tenant relationships, supporting local industry while improving worker conditions, honoring aristocratic traditions while questioning their underlying assumptions. Lord Davenant's carriage was spotted on the Alton Road, Lady Augusta mentioned with deliberate casualness. "He should arrive before dinner, assuming the new gelding performs as promised." Marielle nodded, unsurprised yet thoughtful. Her father's gradual reconciliation with Seraphine's choice had progressed through carefully calibrated stages, from rigid disapproval to reluctant acknowledgement to eventual, if qualified, acceptance. The birth of grandchildren had accelerated this evolution, providing common ground where ideological differences might otherwise have created permanent division. "Catherine will be delighted," she said. "She has prepared a recitation specifically for his approval, something appropriately classical and impressively complex for a 5-year-old memory." "Edward always did appreciate performative accomplishment," Lady Augusta observed with characteristic dryness, "though I believe his affection for the child transcends mere exhibition of suitable ducal granddaughter attributes." This represented perhaps the most unexpected development of the intervening years. Lord Davenant's genuine attachment to his granddaughter, manifested in quarterly visits and correspondence, maintained with surprising consistency. The man who had once viewed female offspring primarily as matrimonial assets had discovered unexpected pleasure in Catherine's precocious intelligence and forthright personality. The nursery door opened again, admitting little Clara Harrington, who had evidently escaped parental supervision to seek her aunt. The child, a miniature Seraphine with her father's thoughtful brow, rushed to Marielle with unabashed enthusiasm. "Aunt Duchess!" she exclaimed, employing the title she had invented during their previous visit. "Mama says the baby is coming soon. Will it be a boy cousin or a girl cousin?" "That remains the almighty secret for another month," Marielle replied, embracing her niece warmly. "Though your Uncle Alaric claims to detect distinctly masculine movements when he speaks to my abdomen each evening, Papa says gender is irrelevant to intellectual capacity," Clara informed her solemnly. He has female students at Harvard who outperform the male ones in Greek translation and archaeological theory. A progressive perspective worthy of consideration, Lady Augusta remarked with evident approval, though perhaps slightly advanced for discussion in certain Hampshire drawing rooms. One must choose one's revolutionary battlefields with strategic care, particularly when navigating aristocratic waters. This delicate balance between progressive ideals and pragmatic reality had defined Marielle's approach to her ducal role. Rather than direct confrontation with entrenched societal expectations, she had employed quiet influence and demonstrated competence to gradually expand the parameters of acceptable Duchess behavior. The Winthorne Tenant School now educated both sons and daughters to 14, with scholarships established for exceptional students of either gender to continue at county grammar schools. The estate employed female bookkeepers in its home farm operations, and Marielle's quarterly agricultural reviews were attended by neighboring landowners initially skeptical but increasingly respectful of her practical knowledge and management insights. "Shall we join the others?" Lady Augusta suggested, offering her arm to Clara. "I believe Mrs. Pettigrew has prepared a nursery tea that would rival the Queen's own table." As they descended the grand staircase toward the entrance hall where family reunions unfolded, Marielle paused briefly before the portrait commissioned for her 30th birthday. The artist had captured something essential in his representation, not merely her physical features, but the quiet assurance of a woman who had found her rightful place in the world. She wore her grandmother's medallion in the painting, the silver disc catching light against the Duchess's traditional pearls. Around the frame, almost imperceptible unless one looked specifically, ran the Latin motto that had guided 3 generations of independent women: Veritas in tenebris lucet. Truth indeed shone in darkness, illuminating pathways through society's labyrinthine expectations and revealing possibilities beyond conventional limitations. That spring day in Thornhall Chapel, when the Duke had lifted Seraphine's veil and spoken another name, truth had asserted itself against carefully constructed artifice, initiating ripples of consequence that continued to expand through both sisters' lives. Alaric looked up as Marielle descended the final steps, his expression warming with recognition that transcended mere fondness or habitual affection. After 7 years of marriage, they had developed the rare capacity to see one another clearly, beyond title and position, beyond public persona, to the essential humanity beneath. He extended his hand, and she placed hers within it, a gesture repeated countless times yet never diminished in significance. Together they turned to welcome family, both conventional and unconventional, united by bonds stronger than mere tradition or obligation. The Duchess of Winthorne, once overlooked, now fully seen, stepped forward to embrace her sister, the afternoon sunlight streaming through Winthorne's ancient windows to illuminate both women's faces. Different paths had led them to unexpected destinations, yet both had found the courage to follow truth rather than convention, discovering in that choice a liberty sweeter than any society's approval could bestow. Outside, spring continued its patient transformation of the Hampshire landscape, each blossom and unfurling leaf testament to nature's perpetual renewal. Within Winthorne's walls, a similar renewal unfolded, of family bonds strengthened through honest connection, of traditions honored yet thoughtfully examined, of lives shaped by authentic choice rather than prescribed expectation. And in the whispered conversations between sisters, in the laughter of cousins discovering shared adventures, in the quiet exchanges between once unlikely spouses, truth continued its persistent illumination, shining through darkness, revealing paths forward, guiding each heart toward its rightful home. In the gentle shadows of Victorian society, where propriety often smothered truth and appearance valued above authentic feeling, our story reveals a profound truth, that genuine love will find its voice, even when every social constraint conspires to silence it. The Duke's momentary honesty at the altar, speaking Marielle's name when all of society expected Seraphine's, was not weakness but courage in its purest form. It reminds us that our hearts recognize truth even when our minds have been trained to ignore it. Sometimes our greatest mistakes are simply moments when our authentic selves break through carefully constructed facades. For both sisters, true liberty came not from rebellion against social constraint, but from the courage to pursue authentic paths despite those constraints. Seraphine found fulfillment not in ducal coronets, but in intellectual partnership across an ocean. Marielle discovered her voice and purpose not by rejecting her role as Duchess, but by transforming it to align with her values and abilities. Perhaps the deepest wisdom lies in Lady Augusta's counsel to consider decisions not merely for immediate consequence, but for half a century hence. In a world obsessed with momentary advantage and appearance, the courage to choose lasting fulfillment over temporary approval remains our most radical act of self-determination. The medallion's inscription, "Truth shines in darkness," speaks to us across centuries. Even in our modern world of supposed freedom, we still construct elaborate pretenses and accept hollow conventions. Yet truth, once recognized, cannot be unheard. Like the Duke's spoken name in that hushed chapel, it reverberates through our lives, demanding acknowledgement. May we find the courage to speak our truths, to recognize love when it appears in unexpected guises, and to build lives of authentic connection rather than mere appearance. For in the end, it is not the approval of society that brings contentment, but the quiet certainty of having lived according to the truest dictates of our hearts. If you've enjoyed this Victorian romance of mistaken identities, forbidden love, and the courage to choose authenticity over appearance, please subscribe to our channel for more immersive historical storytelling. Each week, we transport you to different eras where passion and propriety clash in the most unexpected ways. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you predict the Duke's ultimate choice? Which sister's journey resonated most deeply with you? Your engagement helps our storytelling community grow and inspires future tales of romance, courage, and transformation across the ages. Remember, like Marielle and her silver medallion, the most precious truth often lies hidden beneath conventional expectations, waiting only for the courage to be revealed.